Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The first thing we're going to take care of actually today is out of order. We're going to hear about the NAHS trip to Panama. It got moved, so
let me just tee this up. We're grateful that high school teacher Susie Udall is here to answer any questions if you have any, as well as Principal Haviland. But just by way of introduction, last year, and we're so excited, we approved the first international trip in a long time here, and we're set to go to Peru in April. And I don't have all the details, Susie, you might, but basically there was some kind of government overthrow or something like that. And
civics, though.
Huh? But I think the security warnings have elevated, and EF, the tour company, won't even approve us going on the trip. So what we're doing tonight is, now we still think it's so important to do international travel, so we're recommending a quick swap of itineraries from Peru to Panama. But Susie, I just want to introduce that and then fill in the blanks for me.
Sure. So thank you for having me back. As was just stated, I was here last October presenting. I'm trying really hard to get a partnership with EF Tours off the ground at the high school. This is my third time here to talk to you guys about it. So you had approved our trip to Peru. We have 29 travelers signed up to go with us right now. I got a call last week because of the escalating issues and the travel advisory that exists now for Peru due to political unrest and a lot of different violence that's happening there. EF has suggested that we don't go there anymore, which I agree. But due to the late time frame, there's only so many options available. And so I found an itinerary that has at least a little bit of the same integrity as the original trip. There's still some cultural aspects. There's some outdoorsy aspects in addition to tourism, education pieces as well. Because I didn't want it to be just, here's this monument, here's this museum, and that's it. So there's a lot of different pieces to it to keep interest for all different kinds of students. So it is to Panama, which EF has deemed a safe place to travel. There's no travel advisories from the U.S. for Panama. So the transition, I'm here looking for approval to transition from that destination of Peru to the destination of Panama. The students wouldn't have to do anything if they decided to transition with us and go to Panama. I did include an email at the back of your agenda that I have sent part of to families and will be sending the rest of to families. So I am the group leader for this trip. So I have decided for my group that I want to transition to a new destination. However, all the students, all the travelers and families will have a decision to make. If I earn approval here today, I'll present them with the options to come with us to Panama, which would actually give them some money back because the Panama trip is a little bit less expensive than the Peru trip, so they'd get about $700 refunded, and they wouldn't have to do anything. EF would take care of all the transition, and they'd just be sent on that trip instead, different destination. Same people from the school, same people from EF, just a new place. But also, if I earn approval and I'm able to change my destination, the students will still have the option to opt out, and they can either select a travel voucher that would be in the value that they've paid for the Peru trip that they can use for up to 25 months for a different EF trip, or they could select a refund, which would be all their money except for their security deposit, which was $350. So that's what I'm looking for today. I can answer any questions if you have any, but I'm just hoping to have all of this work go into something. I really want to get the kids off the ground and see something outside of New England, North Attleborough.
Do the dates still match up?
The dates will still match up. Yes, it'll still be April break this year. Other questions?
Will they require a malaria vaccination or some kind of?
That is not on our itinerary right now, but I can double check on that. That has not been mentioned.
It's it depends what you're doing out there, So I would just like to hear, and I mean, it's not going to affect my approval, but I would like to
share it with the parents that there is a danger of that there, and
Yeah,
to give them the
of course.
research. Maybe our nurse could do it. I mean, it has nothing to do with my approval, but I do think.
Yeah, all of the vaccination requirements are included in their pre-travel or their pre-departure meeting, so I'll be sure to have that information for that time, assuming we do pick that destination.
Can you walk us through a little bit on how you picked Panama in such a short time frame?
Yeah, so like I said, I found out on Wednesday about Peru, and most people have selected their trip, at least a year in advance because of the cost and all the planning that goes into it. So at the time that it is now to still go this April, there's only so many destinations that have availability, especially if the majority of the group does decide to go. It's 29 students, it's a reasonably sized group. So I was sent a handful of itineraries from EF that would match up with dates and availability for our group size. And I ended up picking this one, Discover Panama, because I wanted to have an itinerary that was at least somewhat similar to what I was looking for in the original one with Peru. And what I liked about Peru was it was cultural immersion, and the Panama trip does have some culture. It has a trip to an indigenous village. There's a whole day where you learn about some of the folklore and the history with the pirates in Panama. So I liked that aspect of it. I also wanted there to be more outside activities. We had hiking in Machu Picchu as one of our key pieces of Peru. There's a couple of big hike days in Panama where you can see, the Panama Canal, be in all the little national parks, see all the biodiversity and all that stuff. A trip to a pineapple farm, learn about cultivation, all those different things, more than just being in a city, and that was really important to me. And to also my chaperone team.
Any other questions?
Will they be exploring both the Atlantic and the Pacific side of the canal, or?
Yes, so we'll be on both sides. One of the reviews that I read from students, I read a lot of reviews, but a handful of them mentioned that the students were excited to swim on both sides of Panama and things like that. So we will be on both sides.
Any of our student representatives going? If there are here no more questions, we'll take this to a vote. Actually, I'll entertain a motion to update the NAH high school trip in 2024, would it be? 23. Okay, 2023 to Panama. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second? All right. Do we have any comment on the motions or questions? Hearing none, then we'll take this to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Passes 7-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
good job.
I hope to not be back so soon.
All right, going back to our regular agenda, we'll have the high school student representatives.
Good evening, everyone. Tomorrow we actually will be having our Term 2 Student Voice Summit, and Student Voice Summit promotes student voices within the school and encourage leadership from students from all grades. And so one of the products of Student Voice Summit was the High School Helpers Tutoring, and we actually started the tutoring program, which allows students to tutor other students, and those students who are tutoring will connect to North Serves and earn hours, volunteer hours towards their graduation. And so far, we actually have quite a few students who are being tutored, and we're continuing this process, and hopefully tomorrow we will be able to come up with some kind of bridging program between high school, middle school, and the elementary schools. We also have the winter concert for band and choir tomorrow at, I believe, 7 p.m. And we also have Coffee House on Friday, which is holiday themed. So if you're thinking of coming, you should wear some holiday pajamas or just anything festive, and that'll be 7 p.m. as well.
Some other things that have gone on in the past month at the school was the student versus staff basketball game, which I don't know if I talked about before, but it was very successful. gotta thank Mr. Antonucci for his blast to his parents and everybody. We did get some people from you.
That's funny.
It was really, really good for everybody, and we hope to do it in the future as well. And for more annual events, we also are continuing our annual toy drive at the high school, which I know I have been pressuring some students to, you know, drop off some toys, help the community and everything, which I think is just always a nice, fun thing to do during this time of year. And we also, more updates about Bear Club, because I always, you know, I'm happy to talk about Bear Club. We put up some new posters about like the recycling near all the major recycling points in the school, and we're also hoping to do a fundraiser to get more like bins to do more, you know, separation, teach like our students how to recycle and set themselves up for the future as well.
We have our annual winter rally next Friday to get ready for break, which is always exciting. The dance team puts on a very nice show, and the theme this year is Encanto, so we're excited to see what band, choir, and the dance team will do. The bleachers are up, and they look amazing. There's a lot of talk about them, because you can like see them through the windows, and everyone's like, oh, you see those bleachers? They look awesome. And continuing with sports, there were tryouts last week or 2 weeks ago, and they went pretty well. The girls' basketball team won their first game yesterday, and the boys' basketball team had a tough fight, but they did lose. But it's all right because the season's looking good for both teams.
Any questions or comments?
No, thank you.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Yeah, my only comment would be, it would be great if you guys, and I know you talked about it, but to extend it to the middle school, because you're just walking across it, especially with math, you know, you guys would be a great help, because it's sometimes easy to learn from somebody closer to your own age than an adult, so I'd love to see you guys go over there and help as well. So thank you guys.
We'll discuss that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. I don't see Chris here.
Chris is not here tonight.
Okay.
Yeah, so he'll defer.
Do you want to take that one, or
No,
do you skip it?
I'm going to
Or
talk.
we're going to just
about
pass
the
that over.
High
Okay.
school athletic complex anyway.
So next on our agenda is the Director of Student Services, Meg Kamari.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share out a little bit about My Savers, especially in the context of our conversation tonight around budget. So during the 2021 school year, so post sort of pandemic and the return to our first sort of school year, the district decided to use ESSER funds to purchase a universal screener called My Savers. Before we sort of get into it, just to sort of set the context, a reminder around our mission and vision and where we are and sort of our recommitment to ensuring sort of the safety and support for all of our students. And specifically, when we think of Pillar 1, about serving all students, this slide was included in our most recent Professional Development Day for all of our professionals, and it really takes apart our first pillar around success for all students, and specifically highlights the way in which kids feel a sense of belonging, they feel accepted, they feel in an environment where they're secure to learn, and that we're really addressing their social, emotional learning skills. So when we talk about SAVERS and the way in which we assess that, just wanted to kind of remind us of our strategic plan and where we are in terms of that support. So what is SAVERS? It is a universal screener. Sorry about the poor quality graphic from the Department of Education. So universal screeners, right now in the district, we really focus on a lot of our academic-based screeners, so whether that's Fontes and Pinnell, our map reporting, our everyday maps. But SAVERS came about, I think in the summer, again, prior to COVID, we had our many little strategic groups, and one of the groups focused on how do we assess or how do we measure people's social emotional status, right? So that's something kind of newer to what we do in education, but that does not negate our attempt at trying to support students. So how can we quantify, measure, and make data-driven decisions without having some form of assessment tool? So we use our ESSER funding. We purchased SAVERS. It is a universal screener, so when we talk about Tier 1, about assessing all our students in North Attleborough, that became part of now our cycle in which we assess students. This is just an excerpt from the letter that goes out to parents and guardians. This is grade 2 through 12 plus. And it really, again, talks about how we know that behavior and academic success are intimately connected. And so by way of using this as a universal screener, just like we screen your children for reading, math, this is another tool for that matter. It is an opt-out process. So if a family decide, and we have very little families who opt out of that, but if they were to decide they didn't want their child to participate in this, they can do that. We provide them all the information. Our teachers were sort of very welcoming to this process because it really impacts them at a really small level in terms of their classroom instruction. So just sort of a snippet from any of you who might have children grades 2 and up. This is the parent notification that goes out regarding our universal assessment. So I'll jump in at any time if there's anything you want to add. This is just a screenshot of essentially what a student experiences. So it is a self-assessment tool, right? And so again, really low lift for our educators. Our kids might say, oh, I just sort of blow through that. We know by data and research that they don't, that their results are valid. So for the large majority, right? Again, it's very simple language. The thought process there is it's done, same question, same sort of target areas for all students completing it. Sort of visual representation for the diversity of learners or children that we serve. So 20 questions that are really based on the social, emotional, and academic behavioral pieces. So kids complete this on their own. They get a quick link, go through this process 3 times a year. The sort of categories, again, are social behavior, academic behavior, and emotional behavior. Basic rating system for students looks something kind of like this. A total score would be 60. There's mechanisms at which we know if a student is, lower than 36%, those are high risk or some risk students. This is what an individual report looks like. So our school counselors are well versed in interpreting these, or some classroom teachers, especially at the elementary level, are. This one, in looking at what a North Attleborough student would represent, it would just be a blue line. So Sabres does have the capacity for our professionals to also assess it, just to kind of calibrate the results. We're in our third year we just began our third year of using the assessment. Currently, we only have students assess themselves. It took a little bit for our own school counselors to sort of train their brain to look at it, because you'll notice anything with an asterisk is an inverted result. So for instance, on this one, if we look at arguing, the student who's in blue, the result is they never argue. So you have to look at take your time and kind of interpret the assessment results. But these are available. There are parents who have requested their child's individual score. This is a sample one just from the website, so there's no confidentiality being broken here. Just some general district data. So again, kind of really big picture, nothing that's going to sort of pull away any major big takeaways for us tonight, but just to give you a sense of how we've been using the tool, the value that the tool brings for us, and trying to assess and measure an area that historically has not been an area that districts, not just North Attleborough, are comfortable doing so. So again, we assess our students 3 times a year. On the top screen there, you have our school year 2021, so that would have been post-pandemic. So our kids are really excited in the fall, coming back, right, after being home for a while. So anything above that dark black line is kids who are low risk, right? So 91% of our district in the fall of 20 was self-reporting a low risk on the score. Down below we have our 21-22 school year. And then I just quickly gave you sort of fall data overall. Again, it represents only 2nd through 12 plus students. The positive black number for total students screened, and then in red parentheses, that would represent head count per children who were scoring either in some risk or high risk. This is just sort of some samples, so you get a sense of what our staff see and the ways they can really slice and dice the data to make meaning of it, to adjust practices, focus on individual students, cohorts, look at trends when we think of sort of curriculum purchases or intervention services, any of those kind of measures. So just kind of 3 buckets. The first one on the left, again, is all students in the district from the 2020, these are all fall data points. Black line in the middle represents the national norm, so where 50%, where the national norm is, so we can sort of see how North Attleborough students are doing in comparison. Just a couple ways to kind of slice it. I did it by gender in a specific grade, and then we did it by race, so the way in which students identify. So this is 9th grade students of color. This is the most detailed one I gave you tonight. Again, I don't know that we can make big conclusions from here, but just so you have a sense of what we're trying to, have our professionals utilize in an effective way to better serve students. So this is by grade. So we can drill it down by school, we can drill it down by class, individual students, but this is just grades. So when we really look horizontally how we're doing work, vertically how we're doing work, these are conversations that we're trying to have at our elementary principal level and different various professional groups. So this is just all of our 3rd graders from their fall data point. Black number represents kids are doing well, meaning there's no risk on this one data point of a SABRS. Red would represent students that are in that high risk or some risk category. So from there you can sort of get a sense of across the district, where are we? Or what grades do we see trends in, sort of whether it's a transitional year, a year where we might shift in the way in which we're learning to read versus reading to learn, all those kind of sort of typical academic milestones.
Meg, that last figure at the bottom, between those two numbers, does that represent the graduating class of this fall, or the
So that is-
7127 number? I'm just curious.
Yes. So it's a good question. So I think we're getting better at ensuring more of a higher percentage of participation in the assessment. Unfortunately, kids who might be absent frequently or might not meet that cycle of completing it, or they might be, not jumping on for the 20 minutes. So we have a higher percentage of completion, not surprisingly at our elementary level, but we're getting better and making sure it's getting done at the secondary level, especially at the middle school. They're really well versed in using that data to respond, use it as another flagging tool to reach out to families and kids individually to support them. And we've seen that it's paid off in that way. So that, one of the slides I think I gave you what would have, or maybe I didn't in this, but what would have been that total completion if we had all of our students complete it. So the data pulls right from our student information system, our headcount data, and then we can run it against how many kids are actually participating in the universal screener.
Do you have data, I'm sure you do, but that shows like improvement or like in a particular group, they took it in the fall and in the spring, so do you ever?
So looking like longitudinally,
Yeah.
trying to assess that. So we do. I didn't.
No, that's
I didn't wanna
okay.
get
I was
too
just,
into-
yeah,
but
no,
yes.
it's when I saw this, I was like, oh, I wonder what happens like to those 3rd graders next year, just
Yeah,
that
so
number
for
goes up or
example,
down.
I know we've, the 4th grade was one grade that we had looked at the first sort of 2 years, because their fall would start off low, but by the end they were
Right,
identifying pretty high. 11th grade continued to sort of be a high, not so much for the fall data, but the end of year data. Again, when you sort of think about more normal stressors in life or what they're experiencing as a student, some of it kind of correlates with, we've done, the past 2 years, we utilized the people from SABRS to do training for our staff to make them more comfortable in really interpreting this data, making meaning of it, not just sort of looking at it, but responding. So looking for grade level trends, gender trend, whatever sort of trends we can break it down by. We also haven't, I guess just to answer your question, Catherine, what we haven't done, but again, it has capacity to do all this, is look at it from, look at what our 2nd graders looked at upon return from COVID in the 2021 school year. What did they look like as 3rd graders? So sort of also looking at it that way.
Yep.
Where you have to kind of love data, so.
There's so much, you could start so many places.
Yeah, we got more, okay.
Yeah.
So again, we do it because we're invested in having another tier, how do you you base your instruction on assessment, right? You have to sort of figure out and get data points, whether it's attendance, discipline, whatever it is. And so now the district is really trying to continuously use our SAVES data, universal screening data, just like we do any other sort of academic areas or areas we service children in, to support our mission and vision. That's it.
Meg, thank you. That was a great presentation. Really interesting. I think Catherine had a good idea there in terms of studying the cohort of kids. So 2nd graders in 2020, 3rd graders 2021, 4th graders in 2022, and how have those numbers changed for that group of kids. I think that might actually be a way to measure, are you guys being successful as you reach out to them potentially. The question that I had, you started to address it, but I'll ask it anyway. if, what's sort of the standard operating procedure if a child, is identified as high risk or moderate risk? Like, what steps do you guys take, and how do you use that information?
I'm glad you asked it. So we are typically, the school counselor would contact a parent independently, and they talk them through, let them know how their Saver score was, or, how they did. And I would say the majority of the time, it's a student that we are already connected with, that we have a relationship with the family. But we have found this tool to benefit us in terms of students that might not be on our radar, right? So there's so many additional benefits to you. That's why we universally screen students. So it's an outreach to the family.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. So did the numbers that some kids wouldn't probably identify, you wouldn't know, right? You wouldn't be able to see it, but this test will help identify those. Did the numbers surprise you at all, or you guys? I mean, is it kind of like you guys know the kids, you see them every day? Like, do you think that it's like underrepresenting or overrepresenting, or how do you guys? Do you have any sense of like, did those numbers match up to what your expectations would be of the kids and kind of knowing them? And just curious if you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Michelle can weigh in too, but I don't think there was anything of a glaring surprise, right? So it validated sort of like, okay, we're moving in the right direction. We know the students. So again, the majority of the students that might have ended up in the high risk or some risk section area were students that we were already connected with. But it's now a matter of, it's a continuous improvement, right? So how do we look at that data? We also look at it in alignment with our MCAS data, other data points that give us a sense of student voice and how they're feeling and their connectedness and belonging. So there wasn't any, unless,
No.
I don't think there was anything overly
Yeah.
glaring.
I would say the same thing. I mean, I'm not surprised by it, but 300 kids are 300 kids.
Yes.
And so it just speaks to, I think, the challenges of these young people, but also the challenges of supporting them too. So I think it's work that's never going to end, but this is a really powerful tool. And just to have some data to kind of tackle a problem is huge, other than just guessing, right? So.
I had one more question that just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Do the questions change for high school kids as example?
Yeah, that's a great question. They don't. So some might say, well, those questions seem really simplistic. There's an intent behind why they are.
Sure.
We also found, at least in our first year, our second grade teachers, third grade teachers had to unpack some of the terminology. So for instance, peer, right? To say have a peer, our high school students or middle school students might be more familiar with that, where the second grade teachers were realizing they had to say friend or classmate or buddy or neighbor, right? So there were some, the language is universal throughout the screening with it, there's an intent behind that.
I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm wondering if you ever use the inverse, meaning if you had a child who you expected to flag high, who flagged really low, and then you would look at it and say, well, that child doesn't necessarily have the self-awareness that we would expect, and if that could still be used as a flag?
Absolutely.
If you look at it from that way
Yeah,
too.
and it's also interesting too, one of the areas I think is like isolation too. So you also use it as a starting point of, it's seen almost as a negative characteristic, but what does that mean into the context of, does a child have one good friend, what does that mean? So also there's, again, you really need to keep drilling down and have a lot of other variables that you're considering when assessing it. But there's so many ways in which we use this data or will continue to use it to meet student needs. But yeah, the interpretation of the results can be interesting based on what
Yeah,
you know.
I was just wondering if you actually actively did that for kids who might already be kind of flagged.
Not on a consistent basis.
Is it fully customizable, the questions you ask?
They aren't, no, because they're norm reference, so it's really created just like you would any other universal screening tool.
So could you repeat the same question just to see if the answer consistently throughout to validate your results? If you ask question 1 as question 21, just to make sure that 98% answer
You
the
could, I'm
exact
sure
same.
that was done during the vetting phase of it, but yeah, I guess.
I would just be interested because I know kids, and I think not a high number, but you might be surprised if you ask the same question twice. And I know some behavioral questions for employment will actually ask the same question 4 different ways to see if you're consistently answering the same way.
Well, that's why, so you do it 3 times a year, right? And you have other sort of lenses at which you look at it to make meaning of it.
I have one more question. Are some questions like worth more, quote unquote, when it when it factors into the final score? Like, do certain questions like have more of a red flag or whatnot when the final score is computed? Like, not to say that they're points, but if you know what I'm trying to get at, like
Weighted or
yeah, are they weighted? Yeah.
I
don't know.
don't want to wrongly answer that question, so I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that for you,
Okay.
John.
Yeah.
I guess to piggyback off John's point, is there like a red flag question, like, do you feel like hurting yourself in
There
that?
are, yeah, so that's a good question. There are not, but when we see a student with a high score that is not a child that we're aware of, those are the families we're calling immediately and prioritizing,
Okay.
right? So our first year in doing it, I know at least at the middle school, high school level, we did it right around Thanksgiving too, so there's been some tweaks even in the time of year that we do it. It's not a depression or suicide screener, so it doesn't have that immediate response to it that you might see. It's a universal screener, right? So those more acute screeners are done with it. You need to make sure you're staffed and responsive for things like that. That is not the intent of this screener. But on the case where we've seen kids that either weren't on our radar, we prioritize the call and the outreach.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Nope, thank you. Next on our agenda is an update by Assistant Superintendent Catherine Blake.
Hey everyone. So a lot of the work that I've focused on over the past several weeks was in preparation for the presentation tonight. So I'm going to defer my updates until we talk a little bit later.
Sounds great. And moving on to Assistant Superintendent Michelle McEwen.
Good evening, everyone. I want to start by saying one of the great things about the work that Meg brought forward today is that kind of used to be in North Attleborough where our student services, especially special education department, operated a lot of times individually and separately from our curriculum team. And this year we've been really collaborating every other week to really look at things like the SABRS data, how that aligns with different curriculum pieces, how our social emotional learning curriculum is going to be implemented. And so that one data point has really given our entire team more information when we're looking at students. So for instance, when Tasha asked about individual students, it aligns really nicely. So tier 1 happens for everyone, but then our tier 2 information can be that we do have a few students we're concerned about, and every team has what's called a response to intervention team. So then we can bring those students forward, talk with an entire team of professionals at the school, make sure that student's on everyone's radar, but then pair it with our academic data, information from other assessments. It could be something like MCAS or just observational assessment. So that alignment of doing tier 1 assessments for all students, but aligning it between student services and the curriculum piece has really given us a lot of information to just really know our students better, which is one of our big goals this year. So that's been something that I'm really appreciative of, and I think it's really helped our students too. My update focuses also on the strategic plan. So if you remember last school committee meeting, we rolled out our new strategic plan. This is the beginning of our new document. We talked a lot about that key piece of serving all students, really knowing every student in our school community and continuing to build that welcoming school community where every child feels a sense of belonging. So the day after our school committee meeting, we had our professional development day. That was our main focus of that day. We had a guest speaker come in first thing in the morning and talk to the entire staff about kind of being a light for kids and really knowing that impact that we make every day just by knowing our students. And then the principals all worked together to roll out our new strategic plan with their individual staffs. So every staff had a special 1-hour block with their school principal, and they really dug into the strategic plan and thought about, okay, if we're talking about serving all students, what does that look like at our school? What goals can we set for the upcoming year, you know, to personally impact kids in our school building and in our classrooms? And we came away from those discussions with some really great ideas. Principals are turning those into school improvement plans that will have measurable action steps really aligned with their own school, but then with our bigger district mission and vision statement. So that piece all happened in the morning on PD Day. Then in the afternoon, we really went back to our curriculum areas. So every grade level, grade span, or subject area had specific work that they could do, either around our new reading program. Our elementary schools really focused a lot on what does it look like to teach reading to our students from grades kindergarten through 5th grade. Our ELC students focus specifically on phonics training that aligns with our elementary. Middle school focus by subject area on science or reading or math or really grading policies, things like that that really impact all of our students. We tried to create a through line where we talked about making a difference for students, then knowing our students in our own school, then how our actual teaching and curriculum can impact. So we're really working on that theme. And then our spring PD day is going to be a continuation of that. And we're thinking about doing an idea of really showcasing all of our students in a unique way so that teachers can get a more in-depth look at the students and get to know them even better. That's it from me.
Any questions or comments? Okay, got off easy tonight. Dr. Antonucci, you're up today.
Thank you. A couple of things, actually 3 things. I'm going to add one. And the one, I'll do that one first. But just, as you all know, we're fully engaged in the MSBA process. We're still in this eligibility period phase, which runs through, it's a 270-day period, which runs through March. We've submitted a lot of deliverables throughout the fall. We still have one more major deliverable that's focused on maintenance and capital planning. Katie and I are working on that. The deadline for that's December 28th. We will meet that deadline. They just asked for a lot of information about your kind of maintenance and facility operations, funding, staffing, project tracking, work order system, a whole bunch of things. So we're just kind of downloading the information. So we'll get that done. But the other very important thing is that today we had a meeting with MSBA to talk about enrollment. And enrollment's a really important part of the project. I talked about this last meeting. At some point in the very near future, I believe the deadline is actually December 28th, we have to sign off jointly with MSBA on a number that they will allow us to move forward with, right? So they don't want to overbuild, they don't want to underbuild. So it's not really a negotiation, that's not the right word, but it's, we certainly have a lot of opportunity to weigh in on our system, what we think is driving shifts in student population. We talk about housing starts, we talk about the impact of large apartment complexes on a whole host of different things. So it's just a conversation. So Ethan participated today. Justin, I don't think you ended up
Wasn't
coming
able to
on
make
the
it.
call. We were all kind of invited just because we're all on the distribution list from MSBA. But I don't have any information for you tonight, but we're in a good place, I think. It was a pretty very detailed presentation from MSBA about where they think we should land. But then we had extensive conversation about why we think the number should be higher or lower, or, whatever it is. So we'll come to a pretty good agreement. The next step there is that they'll send us a formal document saying, here's where we landed. And then we need to determine whether or not we agree with that and sign off. I feel pretty good about it, though. I think it was a pretty productive conversation. Ethan, I don't know if you have any different opinion, but I think we're in decent shape.
No, I think they considered, they definitely took consideration of possible building projects happening in North Attleborough, so it's part of an ongoing conversation that, they seem very amenable to, the growth of North Attleborough as well.
Yeah, so stay tuned on that, but it's all gonna come fast and furious. End of the month is coming, so we have kind of these 2 major things left, but it's pretty exciting. I mean, it's getting real. The other major piece too, and the deadline is not officially for a couple months, but I know the town manager brought to town council the other night, town council or finance committee? Both. Sort of the recommendation for the final piece of what would be funding for the feasibility study part of the project. And that money is really important, right? So we need to, at some point, vote on actually allocating that money officially towards the building project. It's very formal language and formal process. But as of today, I don't know if it's official or not, but as of today, we have $2.2 million set aside for that phase of the project. And that number, it's kind of a weird process because we have to put the money aside and commit to putting the money aside, before we actually know what the actual cost is, because we're not going to know that cost until we go hire an OPM, an owner's project manager, and hire the architect, right? So the number we're using is based on information that MSBA gave us about similar projects, similar size projects. So definitely some fluctuations in that number, but I really give a lot of credit to town manager, a lot of credit to town council for just being forward thinking, as far back as 18 months ago, I think, at this point, for putting money aside in this capital stabilization fund. But we're going to be in good shape in that regard. Justin, do you have something to say?
Yeah, do you mind, because I was
Please,
going to speak to this during my comment, but it makes sense to fit it in now.
Yeah.
So you're right, we put $1 million aside already into the capital stabilization fund 18 months or so ago for this. And last night, Monday night, we voted not to approve the funding because it's not a measure yet, but we voted to approve the strategy to, put $1.2 million aside for this. So at some point in the very near future, we will have a measure on our desk that's going to say we're going to put $1.2 million in stabilization for this purpose, and then we'll vote it out. And I'll just work with you on the kind of the timing of when we need to do that. We'll make sure that happens. So that all happens. So for a total of $1 million is 100% lock solid. 1.2 is on the docket to be approved shortly.
It's great news. Yeah. Thanks to the council for even entertaining that.
That's good.
So that's MSBA. Just a couple other things here. Personnel update, I put that on there because I know I've notified the committee as well as internal staffing, but our Director of Facilities, Chris George, is actually going to be leaving the district at the end of this month to take a similar role in another community. And that's not why Chris isn't here tonight. He had a conflict that's just coincidental, but we certainly, Chris is a great colleague and a good worker, and so we'll certainly miss him. But we also have to put a transition plan in place. And so I'm working on one right now. I think we're going to end up, I know we're going to end up appointing an interim facilities director for the remainder of the year. Kitty and I had a very productive meeting the other day with a potential candidate we're very excited about. And then we will we'll work over the next few months to do a full search for a professional facilities director. And I know I said this in email too, but I think there's a conversation to be had with the town to see if a joint town and school facilities department makes sense. I'm very interested in the concept. I've actually worked in 2 districts with that model, as is Katie. And, so there's some ups, some pros and cons of any model you put in place, but I think it's a conversation worth having, and it might be the right time to do it given the transition. So kind of stay tuned on that. No matter what, we want to. I just want to reiterate the importance of having a professionally managed facilities department with all of our needs in town. I can't understate the importance of that. So.
Is there a comparable position already in the town?
There's not. The town does not have one. Okay. So we'd have to kind of see. The challenge is that we're maxed out already, right? And so, a lot of times people talk about consolidations thinking you're going to save money. That's not really the case. I mean, I think what you're doing is putting in a professional, sustainable, long-term solution to a challenge, right, which is managing all the facilities in town. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be cost savings. In fact, you actually might end up having to increase staffing for example, for that very reason. The town doesn't have anybody officially overseeing, their town building. So it's a great conversation, and Mike and I are really on similar pages and philosophically, but we do have to work up the devil's in the details on those agreements. So we'll see. We'll see. So that's that. And then finally, high school athletic complex. Who mentioned it? Ellie, I think you mentioned it. The bleachers aren't done, but awesome progress. And so what is done are the visitors' bleachers. As of yesterday, I believe, afternoon, right? Katie and I were out there yesterday morning, and they were putting the finishing touches on the visitor bleachers, and it's really exciting to see them go vertical. And they're really nice. There's a lot of red, for Big Red. And we are primed to begin the home bleachers, at least the erection of the actual steel, right after the holiday break, right after the new year. that home side is ready. So the massive retaining wall was built. And then it had to all be filled in, right? So a huge retaining wall, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of, or there's certainly thousands of cubic yards of fill is there. So now, it's hard to describe, but so the ground is ready to accept the bleachers at this point. All the concrete footings are poured, and so right after the break, the crew's coming back, and you're gonna see the home side go up within a matter of weeks. The press box actually, which is pre-engineered and manufactured off-site, is set to be delivered to the site next week. So you might see a building sort of hanging around the parking lot. That's the press box. So really exciting. So that should be done. That phase of the project should be done, by the end of January. But it is fun to see the bleachers.
Can weather impact that, or is that all the other stuff has been done, so it's?
Yeah, weather should be fine.
Good.
I mean, if there's a ton of snow, it might have to do some clearing, but for the most part, I tell you, it's hard work. I mean, those guys, I was out here this weekend in that bitter cold day on Sunday, and there was a crew working out there, and they're working on steel, they're working with their hands, and it's it's certainly not pleasant work, but I think they can march through pretty quickly, even if the weather's inclement. So, so good stuff. And then the final piece of that is that the design documents for the building, right, which consist of toilet rooms, concessions, electric room, and all the kind of ancillary spaces required. But that is set to go to bid this week. The bid documents will be ready for contractors, I believe on December 21st, which I think is Wednesday. And those bids are going to be due January 27th. So we're a little over a month away from seeing what that market is for that construction project. So, but it's, I guess we won't know at our next meeting, but stay tuned for that too. So it's moving along.
That's amazing progress. Fantastic. I was at my daughter's, actually my son's two basketball games on Saturday, and I actually saw the guys out there working, and I noticed the bleachers were up on the visiting side, and I went over and took a picture of it. I was just like, it was just like a big smile, like it's finally happening. It's happening quickly. It's fantastic. I think, and with Chris leaving, it's unfortunate, because I think with what he did with at the community school with the roof, I think that was a well managed, on time, project that was delivered, and there was a lot of hubbub around the bleachers and the whole project, but everything came together, and it's good to see that the great progress is being made right now, and hopefully we can just continue to, I know you will continue to carry that forward as we bring on someone new, an interim director, and just 2 cents on the joint facilities director. I think you're right. The devil's in the details. Mm-hmm. At the very least, on the town side, there isn't anybody in that position right now, and there's a lot of buildings. Of course, the vast majority of buildings are in the schools right now. But if there's a way to, I think there is probably a way to realize some synergies there, at least in terms of sharing costs across all of the buildings. If we're looking at one pool of money that's coming from the town side to fund that position. So hopefully it makes sense financially to do something like that. And if it does, it does seem like a good idea. But I guess we'll see how you guys work that out.
I agree.
Just to give you a little historical perspective about that, going back probably over 20 years ago, there had been discussion with the Board of Selectmen regarding town engineer, because a lot of towns have engineers, that kind of oversee the entire structures and so forth. Basically, as you know, we've just cobbled things together over all these years, and we've relied on the professionalism and certifications of the departments that we do have. You've got like Mike Hollowell, and then you've got the other folks, in the various different departments, kind of coexisting pretty much and chipping in with each other. But like you said, there has never been an attempt to kind of put all the resources, the physical plant and the actual folks that are maintaining all under one coordinated roof.
If you think about like the fire chief has the fire department buildings, and the police chief has that's not their job. They're public safety officials. They're not facilities directors. So there has to be something that that could be improved by having a professional focused on that.
our major concern, and very, frank conversations and good productive conversations with the town manager, is like, we just can't lose boots on the ground. I mean, we are maxed out in the schools. I mean, we have infinite needs in our facilities. I don't have to tell you guys. I mean, they're decades and decades of deferred maintenance and, not disrepair is way too strong of a word, but we have a lot of work to do. And so we're going, in some cases, 7 days a week, depending on the situation. But so we can't lose that, because we have to maintain the building. So, but what we could use help is in the kind of I think the professional side of the job, contracting, procurement, strategic planning, vision, all those things, capital improvement planning. So there's a need for both. And so, yeah, I do. I'm excited. And again, with transition comes opportunity. And so I think that's why the time for conversation is now.
Yep.
So,
Especially with all the other with all your projects.
Totally.
Yeah.
No, yeah, totally. So anyway, it's good. Thank you.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Is there this was actually brought up to me by members of the community before, is there a final design that can be released to the public for the sports complex, just so people know what it'll eventually look like, what they're paying for?
There's actually not a conceptual drawing.
Okay.
I can see if the architect can produce one, but we don't have it. They really like these 3 separate projects, so no one's
right.
Put it together. But I can share the design of the building. But let me ask on that.
Okay.
See if we can cobble something together.
Let's wait till the
I'd like
bid,
to see it
too.
myself. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. That's true.
Because it may be changed drastically or so.
Yeah.
But once everything comes together with that bid, we can have them throw something together with the
Yeah.
final design. I just don't want to share something that's
Yeah,
not.
that's true. It might change. Yeah, it might change.
Sure.
Any other questions, comments?
Thank you.
All right. Next, we got the school committee member community announcements. We'll just call that school committee announcements, huh?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Phil Alessi, who is the high school school psychologist. He provided a really great presentation last week for CPAC on anxiety at the middle school. It was open to anybody that was interested. We had an awesome turnout, especially for a December presentation, and he was wonderful, providing so much information to families. I received a ton of really positive feedback. So again, thank you, Phil, and he'll be back for another presentation on executive functioning in January. I believe is January 19th.
Is there a recording of that?
That day I thought we thought of that, and we're like, oh shoot! But so yes, I next time I would love to see it recorded, because there were a number of people who could not make it who would really wanted to see it.
Yeah, it'd be great on North TV.
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I'm all set.
Just happy holidays to everyone, and as Superintendent said, if anyone's struggling, to reach out to somebody in the community, you'll receive the help you need.
I don't have anything.
I'm all set.
I'm all set.
I've got nothing, except hope everyone has a great holiday season and Happy New Year.
Nothing else to report.
Wow, quick one. Next, we have action items. I'll entertain a motion for bills dated November 3rd, 10th, 17th, and the 23rd, December 1st, 8th of 2022. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Do we have any discussion on the motion?
I have a couple questions, and I'm not sure who to direct them to. So, on a couple of the vouchers, there's homeless transportation listed. Are those for students who are in district who are homeless, or is that for transportation for children who are deemed homeless, meaning like are in foster care or something like that?
It's students that are homeless.
Yeah. So foster care, there's not a responsibility for under transfer. There's not a, it's not a funded mandate.
I should say DCF custody rather than
Yeah.
foster care.
So
No.
it's not, but homeless there is.
Okay. So how many students do we have in district who are homeless?
I'd have to look that up, but between homeless and foster, we usually average around 100 throughout a school year.
I'd be interested in knowing the homeless number as opposed to the foster care number. Obviously, they're treated the same in terms of statutory
Yeah.
definition, but I'd just be curious in terms of how many are actually homeless.
And homeless also is interstate, right? So we're close to a border state, so Katie and I have had, or I've been having a lot of conversations with some of our Rhode Island communities since they've adjusted their practice and notification to districts. So that's been a big watch area for us in terms of the increase to homeless transportation costs. It is a reimbursable area, but we've seen an uptick, which isn't surprising given sort of the economy.
And then under the homeless transportation, well, it's not just this, but there are a couple other vendors whose names are just kind of blocked out. For the one under the homeless transportation, is that reimbursement directly to?
Yes, so oftentimes, so right now, again, with staffing shortages, it's been hard to utilize some of our private vendors, and actually it is a cost savings to us when we find families that might be willing to transport, so whether, depending upon what community they might be doubling up in. So that's another option where they are entitled to reimbursement for transporting if identified as homeless, and so we use that other than having to be on a wait list for a private vendor that we are unable to utilize. So there are a couple of scenarios where that's the case.
Okay. Is there anything else that we're doing as a district to support children who are identified as homeless?
From a transportation standpoint?
Well, not just transportation, but just generally. Like, I know we had talked, and we'll get into this more in the budget piece, but we had talked about like social workers and stuff like that. We can talk about that more on the budget end, but I'm just curious because I don't really see anything in here specifically that any other items that have the term homeless in it, other than the transportation piece.
That would be the only account that would identify it in that level of detail.
Okay.
Do you want to jump in on that? That's the only.
That's true, yeah.
No, yeah, and I would just say from like a funding perspective, when we're reporting those expenses out, there could be a portion that could be reimbursed by the state. And so that's why we have it so broken down in so much detail. Whereas some of the other expenses, they're non-reimbursable, so they may just be incorporated with some of our other line items, but not specifically called anything in reference to homeless or McKinney-Vento.
It's a 50-50 split for homeless students, regardless of, again, what state or what
Right, on the
community.
transportation piece though, specifically. Is this part of the reason I'm asking is because I know there are students in district who have been housed either through like parents, staff, that sorts of thing, and I wasn't sure if any of that could be reimbursed if we have some sort of, almost like a discretionary fund, I guess you could call it, for
Yeah,
any
so
of that.
that's a great question. So I work closely with Joan Badger over out of the town side in terms of vouchers they might use if families are doubling up in hotels or motels within our community area. There was an ESSER grant that we were utilizing in terms of like vouchers and things like that. Specifically though, within our operating budget, you'll only see homeless that explicitly identified as by way of transportation. So anything else is sort of assumed either by a grant that we're getting specifically for McKinney-Vento students or through contracted services under special education.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I have one question also, and that's what is the Attleborough area STC partnership? It's ruled after, and its voucher is pandemic enrollment lost aid. Just kind of curious what that expense is.
So that's an expense that we had. It was actually something that was carried forward. We just had a couple follow-ups that we needed to make on the contracting piece of that. And so that was, we used some of the grant funding that we had received last year to offset the cost of that. So it was included in this packet.
So it's the Attleborough Area School to Career Partnership.
Okay.
AASTP. I messed up. Okay, whatever. School to Career Partnership. It's basically a 5-town consortia that we belong to. It's us, Attleborough, Seekonk, I forget now as I'm sitting here. And basically we effectively pay an assessment, and then they in turn fund someone who's on site doing school to career work.
Yep.
And so we have someone full-time from the Attleborough Area Partnership working in North Attleborough High School, working with kids for internships, job placements, all that kind of either actual jobs and internships during high school, and then some post-career counseling as well. It's really a nice group. So,
Yeah,
but the bill is old because we had some trouble with getting the contract.
Yeah, and just the wording of it, it looked like we paid them because of a pandemic and enrollment lost aid, like almost that they lost people, so we paid them, and that's.
Oh, yeah. No,
that's
was it just the account that came from or something like that?
That was just the.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
When I saw that, I was like,
An old bill, yeah.
Yep.
The only other comment is I'll be abstaining, so, do we have any other comments? All right, hearing none, we'll take this to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? One abstention. Passes 6-0-1. All right, I'll look for a motion for minutes dated November 7th, 2022. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, we'll take this to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Passes 7-0. All right, moving on to the agenda. Vote to approve the NAFT Teachers Contract 2022 through 2025 as recommended by the NAFT Teachers Negotiation Subcommittee. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Do we have any discussion? I'll start with the discussion then. I just want to thank the teachers, but most importantly, the negotiation subcommittee. I'm sure there was a lot of long hours. Those take a lot of time, and the administration takes a lot of time. And if anyone saw what was going on in the state around, there were strikes and there was a lot of hostility, and it didn't seem like these negotiations had any of that, so no drama.
It's so funny you mentioned that. I was going to say almost the exact same thing. Teaching negotiations, any contract negotiations, it's not easy. And there's some drudgery, and there's some long hours, and discourse, right? But never was it unprofessional, and it was always cordial. Our North Attleborough Teachers Association, they're pros, and so we're really lucky. To Ethan's point, there's a lot of strife right now between unions and administrations all throughout the state, but not here, and that's a really nice thing, and we should be proud of that as a community.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, we'll take this to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Passes 7-0. We already took care of that, so the next is a presentation of the FY '24 school operations budget, and just a note, if this is past 8 o'clock, we'll be passing the gavel to Ms. Hobbs.
No pressure. Kitty and I are going to do this jointly, and I think we're going to move over to the table, if that's okay. I'm going to stand, but I'm not going. I'm going to take it. Do you mind if I take it?
Yeah.
So each other.
Never know, so.
Excuse me.
That's true. Find some of that first.
Oh my God. It didn't seem to be active, but yeah, that's a lot.
All right, I typically like to stand during budget presentations. I'm Italian, I like to point, but I'm going to sit, and so hopefully we can deliver from sitting. But Katie and I are going to kind of trade off throughout this presentation. I guess, Ethan, it's up to you if you want to entertain questions during the presentation or wait till after, if there are any.
It's really how you flow.
All right. So I'll tell you, so we're fine with anything. So if there's something that's not clear or you want further explanation, don't hesitate to weigh in, and otherwise we'll get through it, and then we can wait till the end. So tonight we are presenting kind of the first draft of the FY '24, fiscal year '24 budget. At this stage, I always like to call it the superintendent's recommended budget. After tonight, it sort of turns over to the school committee for deliberation, discussion, and ultimately the school committee takes a position, takes a vote on the budget. But at this stage, it's our recommendation. One of my goals tonight, obviously, is to present, but it's also if you have feedback or guidance, whether it's tonight or afterwards, on next steps, we'd love to hear them. Stating the obvious here for those who are experienced in municipal government and school governance, but the budget process is a lengthy process, and so we'll be talking about this as a community from now until probably June, when it ultimately gets in this town gets voted on by town council. That's the official appropriation comes from town council. So tonight's step one. And here we go. I talked about this last year, but every year I like to lay out my guiding principles. I think they, some do remain the same. Some will change year to year depending on the circumstances. But let me just walk through where we are this year. Number one, and I know I talk about this a lot, but it's really important to me that the school department budget is accessible to anybody who's interested. I want it to be accurate, obviously. I want it to be transparent, but I really want it to be easy to understand so that, any town resident who picks it up can understand what we're talking about. It's just really important to me. I hope I've accomplished that. And I also make a note here, the budget needs to be realistic because I could certainly spend money on schools if asked to do so. But we also have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers to make sure that we present realistic budgets. It's really important to me that we involve the entire administrative team in the process, and we do. I think the bulk of the work happens at the central office level. Myself, Katie, Meg, Michelle, we spend a lot of time on this, but all of our leadership team is involved, and even beyond the leadership team, whether it's department heads or curriculum instructional leaders, a lot of people need to weigh in because they know what our students need. So that's always a guiding principle for me. We talked about this last year too, but at a minimum, we need to talk about preserving resources, preserving the level of service that we have today. But regardless of the fiscal climate, we always need to talk about growth and improvement, talk about advancing the district, talk about trying to meet the goals in our strategic plan. It's not always the case where we can fund new initiatives and new programs, but at a minimum, we need to have those conversations during the budget so that when funding becomes available, we're able to execute. So that's always a guiding principle for me. And then a very specific one this year, and we're going to talk through this extensively, but we need to start to lessen our reliance on ESSER funding, which is we'll talk a lot about it in upcoming slides, but we have a lot of money built into our operation right now that's effectively one-time money, and it's going to disappear soon. So we need to begin kind of weaning ourselves off that grant funding. Don't know how else to describe that. So those are our guiding principles, and then Katie's going to talk a little bit about the actual finances.
So this is the overall summary of the budget that we're going to be presenting to you tonight. Just as a reminder, when we talk about the current year, we're referencing fiscal year 23. And the budget that we built and that we're presenting is fiscal year 24. The overall increase that we have proposed is a 4.4% increase, and that is just shy of $2 million in increases from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24. With our budget documents and also our budget presentation, we like to present the data broken down in a number of different ways. So the chart displayed on the screen is the summary of our current FTE, which is shown under the fiscal year 23 column, as well as the current budget. And then we've also projected out the FTE that we're proposing that we staff next year under fiscal year 24, as well as the corresponding budget figures that go along with some of those FTE. You can also see the difference between the two fiscal years in dollars and also in percentage. A couple of important things that we want to just summarize or point out here is although there is a 4.4% budget increase year over year, the budget does represent a reduction in overall FTE. So overall, it's a reduction of 13 FTE from each one of the fiscal years. So from 23 to 24. And that's really important because salaries account for such a large portion of our overall expenses. So specifically to our operating budget, our salaries account for almost 80% of our total cost or our total budget. And it also accounts for 75.6% of the increase that we're showing going into fiscal year '24.
Catherine, question, not unless it's in a later point of discussion. Based on those total salary lines, the dollar amounts for FY '24 is proposed, do we have a rough number of what portion of that is ESSER-funded salaries?
We're going to go through that.
I mean, we had talked about this, I think, last year, too.
Yeah.
About the weaning off things.
Yeah, if you wait, we have it all broken down for you.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Also, just for clarification for people listening, can you just define what FTE is? It's on our thing, but it wasn't on that slide, so
Yeah, it's full-time equivalent personnel, FTE. So a full-time staff member who works, say 5 days, it would be 1.0 FTE. If you're a part-time person, let's say you work half-time, you'd be a 0.5 FTE. So I appreciate you asking that.
Yeah, just.
In the budget document, we do try to provide some definitions.
I also think it's important to note that your professional salaries is going down by by half, basically. So those are teachers. So when people see that we're, less, we're not cutting teachers by any means, and that's important to point out in this budget. It looks like basically it's from the other salary line is where the difference is coming from.
We'll walk through all the reductions and coming up.
So throughout the budget development process, as we work to review our expenses and forecast our needs for the upcoming year, there were two major areas that had a significant impact on the overall budget increase. The first being special education tuition. And so that's the expense that the district has to incur for our students that are residing here in North Attleborough that are attending any special education schools that are outside of our district. And so we are faced with a significant increase in the year-over-year tuition cost. And that increase, again, we mentioned it briefly in previous meetings, but that increase is set by a state agency. So we really have very little, discretion in if we can actually pay those amounts or not. So we're forced with having to pay the amounts that are set forth by the state. And then the second driver that had a significant impact in the fiscal year '24 budget, and specifically the year-over-year increase, was the utility budget. And so not surprising, because I think it's impacting everyone, even in their home budgets. But the projections that we're looking at to fund just to be able to pay for our utility expenses for next year are volatile, and they're increasing. And so we just wanted to make sure that we were capturing that appropriately in this budget presentation. So this really digs into the numbers and how the budget was calculated. So I'm not going to talk specifically to each one of these lines. There certainly is more supporting documentation, but if there's any follow-up questions, I'm more than happy to provide some more further explanation. But just as a summary and to talk about the process, our starting point is always the final budget that we're living in the current school year and the current fiscal year. So that's the fiscal year '23 budget. We utilize that number as our base. And then in addition to that number, we look at what our projected expenses are going to be for a number of different components. So of course, having salaries be one of the significant drivers, 88% of our overall budget, we first look to factor in what the overall increase in salary expenses will be. We also look at some of the revenue offsets that we use to that we utilize to offset the overall gross expense to operate our schools and to operate the district. We of course look at those two factors that I just touched upon briefly: special education expenses, specific to out-of-district tuition, and then also facilities, and we're showing that increase in the non-salary accounts, so our general expenses, and that's tied to our increase in utility costs. And then we also have some other factors that we have detailed out here, but overall, each one of these pieces are contributing to the 4.4% increase. And you can see the highlight here is really just those two large increases to our tuition, our facilities expenses. So as we look at the budget, we also like to take into account that it gives us an opportunity to review how we're currently allocating our funds, and we get the opportunity to make recommendations on how we could use those funds potentially in a different way in the future. And so, as you can see on this slide and in the documentation that you have in front of you, we've made a number of budget reallocations that were incorporated into the budget for fiscal year '24. So we will talk about each one of these changes in more detail in a few minutes, but I just think it's really important to note that the overall budget impact is zero. So as we're looking and reviewing our current staffing levels and our current needs, we knew that we really did have to be somewhat creative in order to reallocate funding to staff some of the different initiatives that we have across the district. And so our reallocation or our shifts in some of our staffing levels are shown here.
Thanks, Katie. So I should have said earlier, too, that we walked through this presentation last week with the Budget Subcommittee. So three of you have seen the majority of this presentation, probably in more detail. But I say that as I come into the slide for a reason, which is, as I said to the subcommittee, I will be the first person to say that a 4.4 increase is higher than desirable, right? It's not, might not be realistic, but I think context is really important. And Katie mentioned it, but special education tuition and utilities, when you factor those increases in, both of which are significantly beyond our control, those total $644,000 between them. And that accounts for, as it says up here, 1.43% of the total budget increase. Now, it's a real increase, and so I don't want to minimize it, right? You need funds to pay for it. But without those two factors beyond our control, our budget increase would have been 2.97%. So it's just context. Again, it takes real funding to fund the budget, but I just, we feel very responsible to come in with realistic and justifiable budgets. But this year, we got thrown two pretty big curveballs, and here we are. So it did drive it up beyond anything we wanted. So I just provided some context for you. So let me dig in a little bit. So we've talked about this a couple times, but related to the special ed tuition, just to reiterate. So the private special education schools in Massachusetts, their tuitions are set annually by a state agency called the Operational Services Division, OSD. Over the last decade plus, the annual tuition increases have been kind of normal, as you expect, 2%, 3%. This year, they approved a 14% tuition increase to those private special education schools. I said this to you in past meeting, I think, but this has caused a lot of debate and angst and anxiety all around the state. This impacts every single school district in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts significantly. And so, our tuition alone increased by $475,000 year over year. Now, that's not all related to that 14% tuition increase. Some of it is related to our forecast for students who will be in out-of-district placements next year, and we are budgeting for a net increase of 4 additional students. And so this chart really is just for your information, but We have students, special ed students in out of district placements in 3 different categories. We have special ed collaboratives. We're a member of the BICO collaborative, but you could also send students to collaborative programs. And collaboratives are consortia of usually geographically, what's the right word? Close, what is it?
Close enough.
Close enough, yeah, whatever. Towns in the same proximity, I guess. So we kind of band together basically as communities to provide special education services, so to provide some economy of scale. So those are collaboratives. And then we have private day schools, students who come and go every day. And then we have private residential schools. We have students who actually are in residential programs. And so this year we have, last year when the budget was built, we had 32 students projected in our district placements. Next year we're projecting 36. So, point I want to make on this slide is that Meg's team does a great job with these students, and as it relates to the budget, with projecting the cost of those students. The budget developed on a student-by-student basis. We sit down, we pore over the information to come up with a projection. But I just want to say the only students that are built into the FY24 budget are those students who we believe are going to be placed in another district placement next year. There's no contingency. So I just want to say that and be clear about that. So it's a kind of a real and expected cost that we have to contend with. Shifting off special education, just to provide a little more granular detail, to Katie's point, our utilities budget went up significantly. Utilities alone accounted for almost $170,000, $168,000 increase year over year. It's really gas and oil. And we're not immune to the pressures that all consumers face. We're all experiencing at home, and we're certainly experiencing it on a much grander and greater scale in a school department with our nine locations. So, the budget was built based on the current market conditions, obviously, as well as our historical usage and projected usage. We really dig in deep with our utilities, but not really in our control. So that's the full story of that budget driver. Okay, I just jumped you. I took your slide.
You did. That's okay, though.
After all the prep we went through today.
I know.
just jumped. You want to go back and talk about that?
No, I think we're, I think we're good. So the district does receive a number of state and federal grants, which ultimately helps to offset the overall cost of operations. One of the challenges that we have and that many districts face when relying on outside funding sources is the impact of fluctuations, either positively or negatively. So grant allocations can vary from year to year and are based on a number of different factors, some of which are beyond our control. And so as a part of the budget building exercise, we always review our offsets and the utilization of our offsets and try to make adjustments where appropriate. And so you can see on this chart here, we have the offset that we are currently utilizing for fiscal year 23, and then we've made appropriate adjustments for fiscal year 24. Overall, our offset utilization is actually down, so you can see the incremental change is $107,645 dollars less next year than it was for this year, which can have an impact to our overall operating budget increase. One of the changes that I just wanted to highlight to our revenue offsets year over year was the change in the circuit breaker offset that we're going to utilize for fiscal year 24. So in an effort to mitigate the impact of the special education tuition increase, we made the decision to increase the funding utilization for the special education circuit breaker funding that we receive. And so due to circuit breaker funding is a percentage-based calculation of a reimbursement of costs that the district receives, and we actually receive it on a year lag. And so the information that we received from the state that they're going to be reimbursing our circuit breaker expenses, the maximum percentage is 75%, and they are going to be reimbursing at that 75%. And so we did feel comfortable that it would be okay for fiscal year 24 to increase the amount of money that we're going to be utilizing for circuit breaker. And that is ultimately a projection for us, that we're projecting that we'll be receiving that appropriate level. The risk in making that change is the sustainability. So we could make that shift for fiscal year 24, and then in fiscal year 25, the funding levels could vary, and we could be faced with a decline in the amount of circuit breaker funding that we receive. We're hopeful that that is not going to occur, but that is always the challenge that we face when really depending on that revenue to offset our expenses in our operating budget. So just something to keep in mind as we look at these offsets and talk about them in the future.
Can I ask a question? About the, back 2 slides ago, I'm sorry, you had the table that showed the budget offsets.
Yep.
And I'm curious around, is ESSER 2 the only, I know that circuit breaker amounts can vary year to year, but is ESSER 2 and 3 the only ones that are going to, that you know are going to go away?
Stay tuned for the next slide.
Okay.
It's like a perfect segue, Justin.
Yes.
It's like,
Yeah, I was looking at it
Yeah.
here, I didn't see it, so that's why I figured
Yeah.
I should ask. Okay.
You good?
Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk about ESSER. So that's the other big change in our revenue offset. It's down, as you can see, it's down by over 350,000. So let's talk about ESSER because it's an important question. So just for some history, ESSER, which stands for the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, right? That was established to address the impact that COVID had on schools, and as I say here, continues to have. It came in 3 phases. This is North Attleborough's allocation. You can see the ESSER 1, 2, and 3 allocations. Pretty significant, right? So we've completely spent ESSER 1. ESSER 2 also has been fully allocated and spent in the last couple of fiscal years, but we're still spending ESSER 3. So we still have, when ESSER 3 was received and then forecasted how we were going to spend it, we kind of put ourselves on a 3-year plan to spend that money, and I'll explain kind of where we are in that. And I did have a note here. If FY24 really is our last big bite at the apple as it relates to ESSER. ESSER runs through September 2024, which is the very beginning of fiscal year 25. So chances are FY24 is going to be our last year to really use that money in any kind of meaningful way, because you only have a couple months into that next fiscal year 25. So that was our allocations. Just to reiterate what I said earlier, one of our primary goals in this budget development process was to begin to wean ourselves off ESSER and begin to lessen our reliance on it. So in the past 2 years, as we've alluded to, we've used the majority of ESSER funding for really critical positions in the response to the pandemic. We hired 8.0, so 8 full-time intervention specialist teachers, right? Those are teachers who are providing intervention for students who needed extra support post-pandemic or during the pandemic. We also hired 7 intervention paraprofessionals to provide supplementary support to those specialist teachers and additional students. And we also funded 3.2 FTE, my generic term here, counselors, which I'll break down in a moment, using ESSER funding. It's been wonderful. Every one of these categories of professionals have done a remarkable job for our students. Michelle oversees and Meg oversee these folks, and they have done yeoman's work, and we really feel good about it. That being said, it was intended to be temporary post-pandemic support. And unfortunately, we're not going to receive additional ESSER funding. And so we're preparing for this thing we always refer to as a fiscal cliff, right? Anytime you use non-recurring revenue to fund anything but a one-time expense, you need to be prepared for when that money kind of falls off the table, right? And hence the term fiscal cliff. So that's where we are right now. That money is drying up, and we need to find a way, potentially, to either sustain these positions or find a way to, lessen, to wean ourselves off them, and quite frankly, potentially eliminate them. So let me tell you our plan. And it's a little complex, so bear with me, and please jump in if I'm not being clear. This budget document, this budget, and this has always been our plan, eliminates the intervention paraprofessionals. When the budget for ESSER 3 was originally built, that was the plan. It was to fund them for 2 years and then phase them out. So this budget, after fiscal year 24, eliminates 7.0 intervention paraprofessionals. Again, it has nothing to do with the quality of their work. We really value what they've done for North Attleborough students, but they were directly tied to grant funding. The 8.0 intervention specialist teachers are still funded in this budget. They're still funded for FY24. Again, that's always been part of the plan. So we'll have a decision to make in FY25 for those positions. The 3.2 FTE counselors are a really, really high priority for us. Here's a breakdown of those 3.2. We hired 1.0 FTE adjustment counselor that shares time between MVET and Roosevelt. We have an adjustment counselor, Martin. We have a school counselor, guidance counselor, whatever you want to call it. We like to use a generic term, counselor, these days, at the middle school. And then we also have a 0.2 FTE, a piece of a school psychologist. I really cannot see going backwards with these positions. In fact, I'd argue that we could double or triple the number of these positions and still have needs in our schools, right? Going back to, for example, the Sabres data conversation we had earlier. So as we developed this budget, our top priority was to find a way to kind of bake these into our permanent budget, to make them permanent positions and get them off the ESSER, the reliance on ESSER. Does that make sense? It's a little complex. And so the only, in the absence of additional revenue, whether it's grant revenue or outside revenue sources, or putting forward an unrealistic budget increase, more unrealistic budget increase, the only way to do that was really to look internally and really reallocate funds, to kind of pay for those positions. And so we put a plan in place to do that. Again, the goal being how to make those 3.2 FTE permanent positions in the budget sustainable, non-grant funded. So, again, no outside revenue, no more grant funding. And so we needed to look internally, and so what we had to do is look at other positions to shift. And so we are recommending in this budget the elimination of several positions. That's 6.5 FTE total. It's a kindergarten literacy, piece of a kindergarten literacy specialist. It's an LPN. It's a CODA, which is a certified occupational therapist assistant, which is actually currently vacant. So we'd be able to eliminate that by attrition. And then 4 full-time paraprofessionals district-wide. Again, we can do that right now by attrition. We have several unfilled positions in the district. It's not an ideal situation, but what we're trying to do in this budget is take those 6.5 FTE, effectively trade them. Not to use a non-technical term, but effectively trade them to fund the 3.2 FTE. So we're extracting the ESSER funding out of this budget, and we're replacing it with internal funding, right? So it's just a swap. So I want to say this, though, because I missed this last week when we met with the subcommittee for a while, is that ESSER funding still exists. Okay, we do have enough money to use it for next year. But I really feel it's important to start weaning ourselves off that in a strategic way and not have it happen all at once. It doesn't mean that money disappears, though. So actually, we'll still be able to use that sort of surplus ESSER funding that we're extracting from our budget for other things, curriculum materials, supplies, technology. So it's certainly going to, that money is going to be infused into the system for critical needs, but we're taking it away from the staffing allocations. Does that make sense? It's really a complex accounting even behind the scenes, but I hope I'm explaining it in a way that makes sense to you. Any questions on that?
Just a quick thing, looking back on that left-hand side, what did you say the classroom LPN at Martin is? What does the LPN stand for?
Excuse me, it's a licensed practical nurse, yeah.
Oh, it is an LPN.
LPN, yeah,
Oh, so
yeah.
So it is a nurse.
And again, I mean, we don't want it, we feel confident we can do this from a staffing level, but right now, this particular school, Martin, has a full-time RN and 2 LPNs in the building, so that's where that comes from. So we're very confident that we can still meet our students' needs with that cut. None of this is easy, but it's priorities. You know, and I just want to make that point. At some point in time, in the absence of additional funding, whether it's from the town or the state or a grant, you need to look kind of introspectively and determine, you know, how you want to fund your priorities. So that's kind of where we are with that shift. So that's the ESSER story. I'm going to move off ESSER and turn it over to Katie. But and we can come back to it. But any specific questions on ESSER while we're pausing?
You're going to, basically, the following year, which is FY '25, you're going to lose your 8 specialist teachers, and there's nothing in the books for that.
Well, so we have a decision to make in FY '25, right? So it's either eliminate them or, again, do some other reallocation of internal resources to fund them. Yeah, so it's a big decision coming up.
Philosophically, are we stretched thin in terms of paraprofessionals throughout the district?
I don't.
Talk about 2, you know, there's the concept of 2 eyes in the classroom.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. We could always use more. We could always serve students more, but as far as actual numbers right now, as of today and as of our projections, we feel that we can absorb this cut and still provide strong service to students. Yeah, it's not ideal. Other reallocations, though, not related to ESSER. I'm going to turn it over to Katie.
So we have 2 other allocations that we wanted to present to you tonight as part of the overall budget presentation. The first reallocation that we've built into this budget is addressing a critical need in special education. So in looking at the special education services that we provide to our students throughout the district, we found that there was a critical need to add an additional special education teacher at the AMVET school. And so in order for us to do that, we're proposing that we reallocate a general education teaching position to fund the special education teaching position. And that will help us to effectively serve the increasing population of that elementary school building in which the students, of course, are requiring intervention in the specialized services. Another one of the reallocations that we have built into the budget is in an effort to address the critical need in our custodial services. So we do feel that we are somewhat understaffed in our permanent custodial staff throughout the district. In looking at the budget, we did feel that we had a healthy, a healthy budget in our substitute staffing line. And so in an effort to provide some more consistency and to just increase our effectiveness in our custodial services, we're proposing that we reduce the substitute budget to fund a full-time custodian that will provide the districts with more reliable staffing and hopefully provide a higher quality of service with that reliability.
So that was our reallocation plan. I'm gonna wrap up. We're just about done. And before I get to the conclusion, I did want to share with you some context for our overall spending as a school district, because the reality is it costs a lot to educate students. It just does. In my opinion, in my opinion, we should always spend more on public education. I don't think there's any greater service, in the world than public education. But the reality is we do ask a lot of our taxpayers, and so I always want to be sensitive when I develop budgets and present budgets. But I also want to make sure that we have data to understand kind of where we stand as a community relative to our funding. And so I want to share with you some per pupil expenditure data. And per pupil expenditure is a metric that is calculated and used extensively by the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Generally speaking, it's basically a way to show on average how much you spend on a student, right? Per pupil expenditure, it's an average. It's the only true apples to apples metric that schools have. There's really no other way to compare what North Attleborough spends with another district. There's so many nuances, but the state has this system. They've had it for decades, and they produce this metric called per pupil expenditures. And this is no secret to you at the table probably, but North Attleborough has a very long history of having a very low per pupil expenditure. It's what it is. And if you look at the 300 plus school districts in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we fall very, very low in the mid 200s as far as what we spend on average per student. But there's a but. I don't think that's really a fair way to look at it. And you kind of need to look objectively at data, I think. And so we want to make sure that we look at comparable districts. And how to do that it's hard sometimes. But actually, we tackled that, and Department of Elementary Secondary Education actually produces comp districts for so they tell us, hey, North Attleborough, here's 8 districts that you compare to, and it's socioeconomically, it's performance, it's size, it's a whole bunch of different factors. So we have a list of what they call DART districts, D-A-R-T. It's an acronym for something, district analysis tool or something. So we looked at those districts, and then we also looked at districts who are members of our collaborative, the BICO collaborative, just because we're geographically similar. And what the data showed is not too big of a surprise, but even looking at comparable school districts, North Attleborough spends very, well, we're low on that scale, is what I want to say. And so if you look at the data, we're in the red here. We're second to last out of these comparable groups. The green is state average. So you have all the comp districts, and then you have state average. And I only share this data just really for your information. I'm not looking for a response. And I mentioned this to the subcommittee last week. I'm not looking to weaponize this data. I'm not looking to, put it in anybody's face and pound a fist and suggest that we should be spending more. We have our limitations as a community, but I think it's really important to know where we stand. In my opinion, I'd love to spend more on schools. I always do. And I'm never going to shy away from saying that. But I do just think it's important for us to know kind of where we are. So, if there is a population of people who think we spend too much on schools, there's data to suggest that we aren't. Right? I'm not saying we're not doing a good job with our resources we have, because there is something to be said for doing more with less and being efficient and doing everything we can to spend our taxpayers' dollars wisely, but at the same time, too, the numbers really don't lie in this case. So I just think I think it's good information. So you can use it however you want to use it, but I just wanted to provide that as context. I always try to provide that, and it doesn't change a lot year to year, but I felt it was important to share that this year. Justin, yeah.
Quick, it's interesting that you bring this up, because back in 2017, probably, we were campaigning for an override, a big override, right, like $6 million, I think, around that amount.
Yeah.
And I actually used this data back then. Probably it was 2016 data, 2017 data, and we were still the second lowest funded back then.
Yeah.
And we passed a huge override, and we've increased the school budget 3-4% every year since I've been around.
Yeah.
Right, as a selectman or as a town councilor.
Yeah.
And we're still at that number.
Yeah.
So it kind of puts that in perspective. One thing I want to do a calculation on, if I had the numbers in front of me, I could do it on a calculator or a computer here, but the state average is 19,000 approximately. We're 14,500. If we were going to hit that number, what would that mean in terms of dollars for us to get to that state average?
Yeah, you're
sure
talking,
it would be a ridiculous increase.
Yeah, you're talking.
But I'm just curious, like, if we're going to put that into real terms, like what it would actually mean. It would be interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's between 16 and 20 million. I mean, it's a significant amount of money. And so again, it's not realistic, and I'm not suggesting that we need to strive to get there, but the context is important, though.
At the time that I was making the arguments, though, I think if you looked at from a demographic perspective, we were somewhere in the 60th to I'll say 70th percentile in terms of median household income.
Yeah.
It wasn't 70 exactly, but it was in that range. And to be in the bottom, 1%. And I'm not using this as a chance to say that we should be spending a whole ton more on schools.
Right.
Anyway, I want us to always be level service or above. These are just interesting figures. It's like, what would we need to do to get up higher? It's either a testament that we're extremely efficient, we're doing a heck of a job because of the test scores and the results that we have, and I think that is part of the story. But it's also a testament to that historical, how we've just not, as a town, not over the last 4 or 5 years, but I'm saying previously potentially not spent.
Yeah. Yeah, it's decades. It's decades in the making. It is interesting.
How would we ever get that up? It would be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I hear you on the level of service, but we need to talk about growth at some point. You can't, if we were outperforming everybody else in the state, I could say, oh, we've found the secret sauce here in North Attleborough, but we're not. I mean, we have work to do. We have, so I mean, we do need to chip away at it, but we're never gonna fill that gap that's created by these decades. But it's, I do think it's just good for dialogue and conversation.
I think it affects the overall value of the town too, when you start looking at growth of value of a home. A lot of that has to do with the school. So when we have a school that, I don't know how many people really look at this type of data when they're house hunting. They're more like talk to their friends and say, hey, do you like your schools? Do you not like your schools? That sort of thing. But certainly the per pupil expenditure influences that, and then that can potentially increase your tax base if more people want to come in and property values go up. And so that's something in terms of the long-term planning for the town to consider.
Definitely.
Not necessarily for us to work on.
Right. So that's that. Again, we can come back to this if you want, but I always find it interesting. So some closing thoughts. We kind of launched this thing by talking about these budget drivers that were beyond our control, right? The increase of special ed tuition, that's a state-determined number, and utilities, and they are beyond our control. And they really drove this budget higher than what we'd like. But while they're beyond our control, they're also real, right? I mean, and so we do have to find a way to fund it or not. And then if it's not, we need to make some, really serious decisions. What I would hate to see is us having to go back and cut services to students, cut staff, because we have to pay the heating bills, or because the state has made, in my opinion, an irresponsible decision to raise tuition by 14% in 1 year. I would hate to see that, but it is a real challenge, right? Can you fund this budget? And that's going to be the discussion over the next several months with the school committee, with the town council, with the town manager. And I've had a conversation already with the town manager about this, extensive conversations. We talk all the time, but just about these challenges. And I use this analogy with him, and I wrote about it in the budget document, but in municipal government in Massachusetts, the only account that a town or municipality in Massachusetts the only account that they can overspend in a given year is snow removal. Because snow removal is unpredictable. And so at some point in time, the legislature's told towns, you create a budget, in our case for the DPW, right? DPW does snow removal. You create a budget for DPW. No matter what that budget is, you can overspend that budget because you don't know what your winter's going to be like, right? So no matter what happens, we need to plow the roads, we need salt, we need sand, and we need to plow. Now, the town still needs funding for that, right? So towns have to put money aside to account for that, right? But the department doesn't. So in North Attleborough's case, the DPW isn't necessarily responsible for a winter with 100 inches of snow, right? So we wouldn't ask the DPW to cut staff because of a snowstorm that's beyond their control. So that's it's just an analogy that I'd like to use in this budget season to say, we didn't ask the utility budget to be increased by this amount. The market dictated that. The regulators dictated the price of electricity and gas, and the market drove the oil prices, right? The state is driving the tuition increases in sped. And by the way, we have students who need services, right? But is there a mechanism that we can discuss that just says, that it sort of addresses these issues as kind of not the right word, but a one-time problem, just to allow us to avoid cutting services? I just think it's something we need to wrestle with as a community. And I don't know what that is. And it's beyond my purview, but it's, Justin.
Are you prepared to take that analogy to its conclusion, to its logical conclusion, in terms of what the town actually does with snow and ice, which is we only budget $250,000 a year for snow and ice,
Yeah.
and then we use free cash to pay for that.
Yeah.
But it's not in part. It wouldn't be part of your budget.
So that I appreciate you saying that. The answer is absolutely yes, and that's what I want to convey to you, and I want to convey, and I already conveyed to the town manager. I'm not looking to artificially or in a backwards way increase our base just because we have these unusual needs, right? So I agree with you 1,000% on that. That is because that mechanism, snow and ice mechanism, doesn't artificially increase any department budget, right? They sort of take care of it with other money, and then I don't mean to even talk about the DPW, but just that's the department that does during, right? So I'm not looking to artificially increase the school department's budget. I'm not looking to play games, quite frankly. I'm looking to basically get through this year and see if we can ride this wave without cutting staff. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking. I don't know that if you would want to go into a year with a I'm sorry, what is it? It's special education.
Yeah.
A special education budget that is at the bare minimum, because we put it at the town puts it at the bare minimum because you never know. It's kind of a waste of money, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
put money into an account that you're not going to use it for, and then it falls to free cash the next year.
Yeah.
Kind of. In
Oh,
this
I see what you
case,
mean, yeah.
Like I don't know that.
I see what you mean.
But at the same time, I'm kind of being, kind of joking a little bit with it, but like I do think if you were to kind of present the historical variations between of what that account is like over a 10 or 15-year period, and you could find kind of what the minimum amount usually is every year, I think that would be a worthwhile conversation as part of the town's free cash policy, which is, we do treat snow and ice that way. I'm not saying I support this necessarily.
Yeah.
I'm saying it might be a worthwhile conversation to look into that, kind of what's that historical average spend, and what's that variation, and is there an opportunity to kind of have a similar one for the schools?
I just interject. So Link had mentioned something about that when he was here, so prior to Katie's involvement, where he was talking about I don't know what it was called.
Extraordinary relief.
Well, I think here's what I was just going to say. So I only use the snow and ice as an analogy because it's just something that's beyond anybody's control. There's various mechanisms that school departments use to address things like this. One thing that Katie and I have a lot of experience with is in our former community, we developed something called the Special Education Stabilization Fund. It's similar to any stabilization fund, right? Where you sort of either fund, thanks.
I gotta just make a record that I left at 7:55.
Right.
And that Catherine's assuming chair. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
So that's something, again, this is a perfect time to talk about something like this, where you either, if you have surplus funding on a given year, you might funnel money into a stabilization fund, sort of saving for a rainy day. So I think that's what we talked about last year, like the idea of, is this a time to actually put money aside in the special ed stabilization fund so that we can ride out the fluctuations, because it's a very volatile part of the budget.
Right, but that's something that we could, in conversations about what the town could do with free cash, we could possibly discuss, or at least start that conversation about creating something like that for the schools, as opposed to just holding it in the town's free cash so that the schools know exactly what their budgetary restrictions are.
Both sides could have that conversation with what extra funds with the schools and also extra funds within with the free cash.
Yeah.
We just don't have any extra funds.
Yeah. Sometimes we do. We put money, we turned money back last year, yeah. But, it's just, this is just for conversation, right? Because it's a problem that we all have to wrestle with.
I agree, it's conversation.
Yeah.
I think it's a good conversation to have.
Yeah, and by the way, the Sped Stabilization Fund, in our former district, Katie and I kind of worked a lot to get one formed, and it was really a nice, it was a nice agreement. And so in order to tap into that fund, you always needed kind of joint approval. In our case, it would be joint approval from the school committee, let's say, and the town council. So it was just an above-board, transparent way to fund unanticipated needs. And I think that's important to me, that we, no matter what we do, we talk about, we have a transparent, dialogue and kind of move on. So I'll move on from that, but I just wanted to put that out there as an analogy, because that's how I feel this year, is like, we just got dealt a hand, and I really would hate to compromise the quality and integrity of our core academic program because of these things outside of our control.
Can I say one more thing? I'm sorry.
Anything,
I like
yeah.
the idea of these sort of funds, because it enables decision makers, like all of us, to have priorities and allocate funds and kind of ensure there's the mechanisms that certain priorities are taken care of, versus the usual process that happens in all town departments, including the school, right? Is kind of this line item transfer process where if there's unused funds, they're going to get used in certain ways, and maybe the school's going to want to use their school money for the schools, or the DPW is going to want to use their funds within the DPW. But what if, like, the town council and the school committee, would rather kind of funnel some of those funds towards other priorities if they're not used? Like, this sort of gives, these sort of mechanisms, I think, give decision makers opportunities to fund their priorities. So I like these ideas and concept.
I think it also goes along with the intention behind the changes to the charter to increase the communication between the two sides of government. So if you have a joint fund, then it creates that ongoing conversation, and it makes an affirmative obligation on both sides to have intentional discussions about the best use of those funds, as opposed to making it an adversarial, only yearly conversation.
Makes sense.
I just want to say, interesting, historically, and I'm sure it still holds true today, I've been on both sides of the fence, obviously. I've been on the school committee, I've been on the finance committee, on the board of selectmen. So the interesting thing is, sometimes the driver overall that actually determines what could possibly be that wiggle room, is actually in the two major areas in the overall town budget that fluctuate all the time. One is similar to the school, energy costs, and then the big thing we don't talk about is health insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the two big drivers. So when you have large fluctuations in those, and your anticipated revenues, can't chew away at that and still have left over, that determines really on an annual basis how much wiggle room there really is.
Right.
And that's what we're arguing over. It's never been a question about how much the town side of government gets now anymore. Usually, it's always been an equitable trade-off in terms of percentages, what's left over.
Yep.
That's the real dig that we can't even talk about.
Yeah.
Because that drives everything, the health insurance and that energy cost overall for the whole town.
And you guys are teeing me up, because it's another great segue to my next bullet, because, I agree with you 1,000%, but I just did want to make a point. I've talked to Mike about this, but, this budget, just to reiterate, it cuts 13.0 full-time equivalent personnel. So 13 people who are here this year will not be here next year, which, has implications, but we stand by those decisions and kind of the recommended reallocations. But what it does do, potentially, is create some savings in the health insurance premiums. And so, again, just I didn't want to come here tonight with all problems, right? So we're trying to put some ideas and solutions on the table, because we have a job to do. We got to figure out a way to work together and kind of fund the school department budget. And my final point, and then I'm just going to do a quick advertisement, but I would like to say that our admin team, our leadership team, did so much work last year and this year to put needs on the table. We didn't want to really get into that tonight, things that weren't on the table, just 'cause I think it complicates things. I think there's a conversation to be had for a future meeting about what's not in the budget. But if you hear me say it once, you hear me say it 1,000 times, because the need goes unfunded doesn't mean the need has gone away. And so you consider the per pupil expenditure, you consider just the needs of kids today, you know, we're going to have work to do for the rest of our careers. And so because it's not in this budget, doesn't mean the need has disappeared. And we can talk more about that in the future. And the final thing I'll say is, besides this presentation tonight, we have put together, I think, a really nice budget document. You all have it in front of you tonight. Part of that is a kind of a front-end document. I call it an executive summary. It's about 11 pages. I've done a lot of teaching and training around school budgets throughout my career, and I always encourage people to try to tell a story when you're presenting school budgets. School budgets they're numbers, and they can be very boring. But to the extent that we can distill kind of the complexity of a school budget and the challenges into text and into a story, we try to do that. I don't know if I've accomplished that or not, but that front-end document is probably a 10-minute read. Hopefully gives anybody who's picking that up the story I told you tonight, right? So I hope you find that useful. And then in addition to the kind of written executive summary, there are 17 financial exhibits. So for those people in the community who are really dying to pour through the numbers, to Katie's point earlier, we present the data in a lot of different ways. And so there's sort of a flavor, no matter what you like, there's sort of your flavor, right? So whether it's a high-level summary or a really granular summary, or whether it's a per-location summary, we've given it to you all in 17 exhibits. And then if you're really interested, we also have provided, it's quite literally an Excel spreadsheet, but the actual budget, the line item detail, 400 line items, 400 plus line items in our budget. So all of this information will be available to the public. On our website, there'll be an FY24 budget tab. It'll be and I'll probably push out a message to the community. So again, anybody who's interested, I encourage you to read it. Obviously, if there's any questions, naturally for the school committee, but also for the community, my contact information is, people know where to find me anyway, I think, but the contact information's in there. But I think it's a pretty nice document, and I do not think, and I'm going to give myself a pat on the back, and Katie and the rest of the team, I don't think you'll find a more transparent school budget in Massachusetts. And hopefully, you know, it provides answers to questions that people might have, because that's our overall goal. Because it's a big ask, you know, for the community to fund a $45 million, budget. So I do think our kids deserve it. So, with that, be glad to entertain any more questions, but that's where we are.
Catherine? Yeah. Even though he didn't solicit, can we all say thank you?
Yes, for sure.
You and Catherine.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody have any other questions? I know this is a lot to digest.
Are you gonna, sorry, the question is, were these exhibits, because I didn't have a chance to look at the email you sent, were these already emailed to all of us in the digital package?
I think so. I think you had the written executive summary with the exhibits.
The exhibits,
Yeah.
okay, good. I would like to share this with some council members, the council in general.
So with your permission,
Yes.
I would love to share the entire document with the town council if you think that would be helpful, or is that too much?
That would be great, everything.
Well, maybe maybe even the executive summary and the
The
exhibits.
executive summary and the details.
Yeah.
It could be 3 separate files even, if you
Yep.
wanted to do all 3, but I could let them know.
Okay.
Here's the executive summary if you want, superintendent, assistant superintendent Blake's, talk track, summation, if you will, of the budget, and the drivers, and then the details, and just to get that to them as soon as possible.
Great.
That'd be great.
Great. I will do that in the next couple of days.
Oh, cool.
Yep. All right.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, a little long, but thank you.
No, it was
Very good.
Very good and very worthwhile. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is public comments and questions, but there's nobody here, I don't think. And so then the chairman's report, but Ethan is not here, and so I assume that that's all set, so I guess I can take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Everyone vote? What's the word?
All in favor?
Oh, any discussion, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays, or, okay. With that, we will adjourn at 8:05.
Not too bad.